Sometimes a narcissist doesn't just become difficult, sometimes they become cold, calculated, emotionless. And the most frightening part? It happens when they realize they can no longer control you. What are the signs that a narcissist has crossed the line from manipulation into something much darker? And why does this shift usually happen right after you start becoming stronger? If you have ever felt like someone you trusted suddenly became emotionally dangerous, if their kindness suddenly turned into cruelty, if their empathy disappeared overnight, then what you are about to learn may explain exactly what changed. Subscribe now if you believe emotional peace is more valuable than toxic approval. Like this video to help others recognize these hidden patterns. Comment, I choose strength if you are protecting your boundaries. And stay with this channel for wisdom that protects your peace. Subscribe now if you believe emotional peace is more valuable than toxic approval. Like this video to help others recognize these hidden patterns. Comment, I choose strength if you are protecting your boundaries. And stay with this channel for wisdom that protects your peace. One of the most frightening signs that a narcissist's behavior has moved into a much darker emotional space is when you begin to notice something missing that used to at least appear to be there. Emotional response. Not just kindness, but basic human concern. It is the moment when their reactions to your pain, your struggles, or even your tears begin to look empty, mechanical, or completely indifferent. At first, this can feel confusing rather than frightening. You may think they are just stressed. You may think they are going through something. You may even blame yourself and wonder if you are expecting too much. But over time, a pattern starts to form. You begin to notice that your emotional reality simply does not move them anymore. You may explain how something hurt you, and instead of concern, they respond with irritation. You may try to express your feelings, and instead of understanding, they respond with cold logic or complete dismissal. You may even find that moments where you are most vulnerable are the moments where they seem the least emotionally available. This is where many people start asking a painful question: did they ever really care? Because the contrast can feel shocking. Someone who once seemed attentive may now seem distant. Someone who once listened may now interrupt or invalidate. Someone who once appeared supportive may now seem emotionally absent. What often explains this shift is not that they suddenly became different, but that the mask they used earlier is no longer serving their purpose. Early in relationships, many narcissistic personalities mirror empathy because it helps build connection and trust. But when control becomes more important than connection, empathy often becomes optional in their behavior. And this is when the emotional coldness starts becoming visible. One of the clearest signs is the absence of remorse. When emotionally healthy people realize they hurt someone, even unintentionally, there is usually some level of concern. Even if they disagree, they still show awareness that pain matters. But when a narcissist is operating from a very defensive place, remorse can feel threatening to their ego. Because showing remorse means admitting fault, and admitting fault means confronting imperfection. So instead of acknowledging your hurt, they may minimize it. Instead of apologizing, they may justify. Instead of reflecting, they may deflect. You might hear phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "You're overthinking," "That never happened like that." These responses are not about resolving the situation. They are about protecting their self-image. Because if they admit your pain is real, they must also admit they contributed to it. And that is often what they avoid. What makes this especially painful for many people is that they continue trying to reach the empathy that used to appear. They try explaining better. They try staying calmer. They try choosing better words. They believe if they just communicate correctly, the caring version of the person will return. But emotional coldness rooted in ego protection cannot be solved through better explanation. Because the issue is not misunderstanding, it is emotional avoidance. And this is where many people begin experiencing emotional exhaustion, because trying to receive empathy from someone who is emotionally shut down feels like knocking on a locked door. The more you try, the more drained you become. The more you explain, the less heard you feel. Over time, something else becomes noticeable. Their lack of remorse may even start looking like confidence. They may act completely unbothered after hurting you. They may continue normally while you are still processing pain. They may even seem annoyed that you are still affected. This can be one of the most destabilizing experiences because it creates emotional imbalance. One person is trying to repair, the other is trying to move past accountability. And this is where many people begin realizing something important. You cannot create empathy in someone who is actively avoiding it. This realization can feel painful, but it can also be freeing. Because once you stop expecting emotional responsibility from someone unwilling to offer it, You can begin redirecting your energy toward protecting yourself instead of convincing them. You begin noticing something very important. Their coldness is not proof you are unworthy of care. Their indifference is not proof your feelings are too much. Their lack of remorse is not proof you are asking for too much. It is often proof they are unwilling to sit with discomfort. And emotional maturity often comes down to one simple ability: the ability to sit with the discomfort of knowing you hurt someone and choosing to do better. When that ability is missing, emotional coldness often fills the space instead. What becomes powerful for you is recognizing that empathy is not something you should have to beg for. Basic emotional respect is not something you should have to earn through perfect behavior. And accountability is not something that should only exist when it is convenient. The moment you begin accepting these truths is often the moment your focus starts shifting. Instead of asking why they are so cold, you begin asking why you tolerated the coldness for so long. And that question is not about blame, it is about growth, because awareness is where protection begins. Awareness helps you stop normalizing emotional neglect. Awareness helps you stop excusing repeated patterns. Awareness helps you start choosing environments where emotional safety exists naturally. And that is the real turning point. Not when they change, but when you stop trying to warm someone who is choosing to remain cold. Because your energy deserves to exist where empathy is natural, not negotiated. And that realization alone can become the beginning of your emotional freedom. One of the most disturbing changes people begin to notice when a narcissist feels they are losing control is that your growth no longer makes them proud, it makes them angry. Your independence, your confidence, your ability to think for yourself, things that should normally be respected in any healthy relationship, suddenly start triggering negative reactions. And this is where many people become deeply confused, because you may think, I am becoming calmer, I am becoming stronger, I am creating less drama. Why does this seem to bother them? The answer often lies in something very simple but very uncomfortable to accept. For a narcissist who depends on psychological control, your independence does not look like growth. It looks like disobedience. When you start setting boundaries, they may not see self-respect. They may see rejection. When you start saying no, they may not see strength. They may see loss of influence. When you stop explaining yourself, they may not see maturity. They may see loss of access. And because control often equals security for them, anything that removes control can feel like a threat, not a disagreement, a threat. This is why some narcissists begin trying to reestablish control through subtle punishment. Not always obvious punishment, not always loud anger. Sometimes the punishment is psychological. Sometimes it is emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it is criticism that appears small, but is repeated often enough to slowly wear down your confidence. You may notice they start pointing out your flaws more often right after you start becoming more confident. You may notice they become less supportive right after you make positive changes. You may notice they become distant right after you stop tolerating disrespect. This is not coincidence, it is often a reaction, because your strength changes the balance of the relationship. When you become emotionally stable, you become harder to manipulate. When you become self-assured, you become harder to intimidate. When you become clear about your worth, you become harder to guilt trip. And when manipulation stops working, some narcissists try pressure instead. Sometimes that pressure looks like sarcasm, small comments that seem harmless individually but carry a quiet message. Don't get too confident. Sometimes it looks like comparison, mentioning others who are supposedly easier or better. Sometimes it looks like emotional withdrawal designed to make you feel you did something wrong simply by becoming stronger. The goal is rarely stated directly, but the pattern often says the same thing. Return to the version of yourself I could control. What makes this especially painful is that many people initially respond by trying to become even better. They think maybe they need to be more patient, more understanding, more flexible. They think maybe they are accidentally hurting the other person by changing. But this is where a very important realization begins. Healthy people adjust to your growth. Unhealthy people resist your growth. Emotionally secure individuals may need time to adjust to change, but they do not punish you for becoming healthier. They may communicate, they may express feelings, but they do not try to shrink you back to an earlier version of yourself. That shrinking behavior is what many survivors later recognize as one of the clearest warning signs. Because love supports expansion, control demands limitation. Another form this punishment sometimes takes is creating small emotional consequences when you assert yourself. For example, when you say no, they may become cold. When you disagree, they may become distant. When you express needs, they may act overwhelmed or annoyed. This creates what psychologists sometimes call behavior conditioning. Over time, you may start associating your healthy behavior with emotional discomfort. You may start thinking, maybe it's easier if I just stay quiet. Maybe it's better if I just agree. Maybe I should not bring this up. And this is exactly how control quietly rebuilds itself if awareness is not present. But when awareness grows, something powerful happens. You begin seeing the pattern instead of just feeling the discomfort. You begin recognizing that your independence is not causing the problem, it is revealing the problem. Because healthy relationships do not become unstable when one person becomes healthier, only unhealthy dynamics do. This awareness allows you to stop negotiating with your own growth. It allows you to stop apologizing for your boundaries. It allows you to stop shrinking just to keep temporary peace. And this is where your real strength begins forming, not in fighting them, not in changing them, but in refusing to abandon your progress just because someone else is uncomfortable with it. Because one of the most important emotional milestones in life is this: learning that someone else's discomfort with your growth does not mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you are finally doing something right. And the moment you stop interpreting their punishment as your failure is the moment their tactics begin losing power. Because punishment only works when you believe you deserve it. But once you understand that your independence is healthy, that your voice is valid, and that your peace matters, their attempts to make you feel guilty for growing start looking different. They start looking like resistance to losing control. And once you see that clearly, you stop negotiating your strength. Because real healing begins the moment you decide you will not become smaller just to make someone else feel bigger. And that decision alone can change the entire direction of your life. One of the most disturbing realizations people sometimes come to in narcissistic relationships is not just that the person hurts them, but that at certain moments, the narcissist appears completely comfortable with that pain. In some cases, they may even seem satisfied by it. This is not always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it appears as a small smile during your frustration. Sometimes as emotional indifference while you are clearly hurt. Sometimes as a calmness that feels completely inappropriate for the situation. And this is often the moment people begin to feel something deeper than sadness. They feel fear, because causing pain is one thing, but appearing unaffected by it, or worse, appearing empowered by it, creates a completely different emotional experience. To understand this behavior, it is important to understand something very uncomfortable. For some narcissistic personalities, emotional reactions from others can feel like proof of influence. When they see that they can still affect your emotions, even negatively, it reassures them that they still matter psychologically in your world. So your pain may not be what they are focusing on. Your reaction is. If you cry, they may feel powerful because they caused the reaction. If you argue, they may feel significant because they triggered engagement. If you become frustrated, they may feel validated because they still have emotional impact. This does not always mean they consciously enjoy suffering, but it often means they value the emotional reaction more than they value your emotional safety. And this is where things can start feeling emotionally dangerous, because most healthy relationships operate on an unspoken rule. I do not want to see you hurt. Even during disagreements, there is usually a line people do not want to cross because they care about the other person's emotional well-being. But when someone repeatedly crosses that line without hesitation or without remorse, it changes how safe the relationship feels. You may start noticing they bring up sensitive topics during arguments because they know it affects you. You may notice they mention your insecurities when they feel challenged. You may notice they escalate situations right when things are becoming calm. This is not always random. Sometimes it is strategic, because emotional escalation can restore control when they feel they are losing it. If they cannot win through logic, they may try winning through emotional destabilization. If they cannot control your decisions, they may try controlling your emotional state. And this is why some people describe feeling emotionally exhausted rather than just hurt, because they are not just dealing with conflict. They are dealing with someone who seems willing to use emotional pain as a tool. What makes this especially confusing is that outside of these moments, the narcissist may appear completely normal. They may laugh with others. They may appear kind socially. They may even act generous in public settings. This contrast can make victims doubt their own experiences. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But patterns matter more than isolated moments. And when someone repeatedly shows awareness that something hurts you and continues using it anyway, that is not accidental behavior. That is information. And one of the most important turning points in emotional recovery is when you stop asking whether they intended to hurt you and start asking a more important question. Why am I staying in situations where my pain is not taken seriously? Because healing often begins when your focus shifts from analyzing their behavior to protecting your well being. Another difficult truth many people eventually face is this: some narcissists become more provocative when they feel ignored. If emotional reactions have been their way of feeling significant, then emotional calm from you may feel like invisibility to them. So they may increase intensity trying to provoke a reaction again. Stronger comments, stronger criticism, stronger emotional triggers, not because you did something wrong, but because your calmness removed their usual feedback. This is why emotional detachment becomes so powerful. When you stop reacting the way they expect, their usual tools stop producing the same results. And when their strategies stop working, their behavior often reveals more about their emotional limitations than about your worth. Because emotionally mature people do not need to provoke pain to feel powerful. Emotionally secure people do not need reactions to feel significant. Emotionally healthy people feel strength through stability, not through domination. And this is where your awareness becomes your protection. Because once you understand that some reactions are being provoked rather than resolved, you begin choosing your responses more carefully. You begin protecting your emotional energy instead of defending every attack. You begin understanding something incredibly important. Not every emotional invitation deserves your participation. And sometimes the strongest response is refusing to provide the reaction someone is trying to provoke. Because when someone stops receiving emotional rewards for hurtful behavior, one of two things usually happens. Either they escalate temporarily trying to regain that reaction, or they begin looking elsewhere for easier emotional influence. Either way, your non-participation becomes your shield. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: their comfort with your pain is not proof you are weak. It is proof you stayed compassionate longer than they stayed accountable. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to prove your value to someone who measures value through control instead of care. Because your emotional safety was never supposed to be negotiable. And recognizing that truth may be the moment you finally choose yourself. When a narcissist realizes they are losing control over you, or that you are no longer available to be manipulated, one of the most shocking behaviors they sometimes display is an attempt to undermine your life in subtle but destructive ways. This is not always dramatic or obvious. It may begin with small comments, indirect criticisms, or carefully timed actions meant to create doubt about your character, and because it often happens quietly, you may not even notice it at first. But over time, these actions can feel like a storm cloud hanging over your life, designed to destabilize your peace, your confidence, and your relationships with others. One of the most frightening aspects of this behavior is that it rarely looks like the person is angry in the traditional sense. They are often calm, composed, even polite in public, while quietly manipulating perceptions behind the scenes. This makes the experience doubly confusing because outside observers may see someone who seems reasonable, charming, or professional. Meanwhile, the subtle damage being done to your reputation, your credibility, and your emotional state continues. These tactics can include spreading misinformation. A narcissist may present a version of events that makes you appear unreasonable, selfish, or unstable. They may carefully choose who hears what, knowing that selective information can influence perceptions in ways that are hard to correct later. At first, these moments may seem minor or even accidental. Someone may repeat a story incorrectly or misunderstand your actions, but patterns emerge over time, revealing a deliberate effort to alter how others see you. Another tactic is emotional triangulation. This is when the narcissist tries to involve other people in their narrative, turning friends, colleagues, or family members into witnesses or even silent supporters of their version of reality. They may share half-truths, exaggerations, or misleading comments, all designed to create doubt about your behavior. Because social perception is incredibly powerful, even small distortions can make you question yourself. You may begin to wonder, am I overreacting? Did I handle this poorly? And that self-doubt is exactly what they are counting on. Gaslighting often combines with this. The narcissist may deny things they said, insist events happen differently, or claim that your memory is faulty. This can create confusion, making you second-guess your instincts. They may present themselves as calm, rational, and reasonable, while casting you as irrational or emotionally unstable. And the more confident you are becoming in yourself, the more they feel threatened, and the more they may intensify these strategies. Another form of quiet destruction is character assassination in professional settings. If you have colleagues, clients, or acquaintances, a narcissist may subtly undermine your reputation with careful remarks about your reliability, competence, or intentions. Often, this is done through innuendo, carefully worded critiques, or selective sharing of information that puts you in a negative light. Over time, these small manipulations can erode trust, create tension, or isolate you socially, making you feel vulnerable even when you have done nothing wrong. The psychological effect of this behavior can be exhausting. You may start overanalyzing interactions, worrying about misunderstandings, or feeling the need to defend yourself constantly. Every conversation, every email, every encounter may feel charged, as if a hidden agenda is always present. This emotional vigilance is draining, and it can impact your confidence, your decision making, and your sense of safety. However, awareness is your greatest defense. Once you recognize these tactics for what they are, attempts to regain control and dominance after realizing you are no longer under their influence, you begin to see them as predictable rather than personal. The manipulation is not about you, it is about their need to restore power in a situation where they feel powerless. And understanding this changes the dynamic completely. Boundaries become critical at this stage. Limiting contact, documenting interactions, and avoiding unnecessary engagement allows you to protect your reputation and your emotional well-being. Speaking with trusted allies about patterns rather than isolated events helps preserve clarity and perspective. And perhaps most importantly, trusting your own memory, instincts, and judgment becomes non-negotiable. Finally, it is essential to remember that attempts to destroy your life quietly are usually temporary. Narcissists depend on emotional reactions and control. The moment you refuse to provide those reactions, the power of their tactics diminishes. Over time, you will see that your confidence, your reputation, and your life remain intact not because of their approval, but because you maintained your boundaries and refused to participate in their games. By understanding the quiet, destructive strategies a narcissist may use when defeated, you gain the insight and resilience needed to protect yourself. You begin to see that their fear of losing control drives behavior that is manipulative and damaging, and that your refusal to be destabilized is your strongest defense. This awareness is empowering because it allows you to move forward, not with anger or revenge, but with clarity, strength, and freedom, knowing that their attempts to undermine you are ultimately powerless against your self-respect and stability.